Practice number 5. Students usually find it a little bit more challenging. I describe it as putting it all together. Now, there's all that, what I call that meta-narrative, which is data analysis, plan and teach, and then demonstrate impact. Well, now we're demonstrating impact. It doesn't want to tell you just what the results were. It's saying, what was that journey? Put it all together and tell me. So you can have to connect the theory, which is, your evidence and research for your pedagogical strategies, how you taught, and here's the evidence of impact. And you must, in that process, evaluate its effectiveness and demonstrate what the actual impact was. A second stanza to that is to examine and discuss your decisions in the moment, deliberative decisions as well as in the moment, and were they effective or not. In some ways, it's a little bit repetitive. I find this is not as clear as it needs to be. But you have two scenarios. One is a whole class. So you have to discuss all this about the whole class. And then the other one is you need to have your learning needs of students. And I would use your focus students. And then you do a focus student scenario where you demonstrate effectiveness, impact on learning, and putting it all together. And what do I need to submit? 2 scenarios, whole class, students, collected work samples. I call it the before and after academic photo of work samples. This is what they did at the beginning, this is what they do at the end, and I can demonstrate and show you through evidence of impact. Resources or tools you use, some of the challenges that you had, and you link your theory with your practice. What was your decision making? What was your thinking? Now, you're not going to introduce anything new here. In fact, you're going to demonstrate that your data set in section number 1, your teaching strategies in section number 2 were these because of the data, and your final assessment, the summative assessment, is in section number 3. What do you must include? Pre and post samples of work. Draw them from the focus students. Relevant resources that you might have used teaching. So there's probably multiple ways of solving this one. It's a bit more of conclusion, but I call it the putting together. So let's have a look at a sample of student work. I think this is the primary example. It's done quite well. So it talks about scenario 1, the whole class. So at the start of the unit, this is what I found out. In other words, they're giving some commentary on the data. These are my pre-teaching samples, and they evidence them with the annotations. These are not new things. They're things that already exist in the document. This is what my remediation. Now, I don't have to use the term remediation. The student does, and I think they use it effectively. This is how you respond to it. And it says, this is what I did. Modelling, sentence starters, conferencing, visual aids. In other words, my response was to the data and the samples of work to do these things. And then we're saying, and here's some examples of how I used it. Here's my next step. I then followed up step 1, step 2. Not that you need to use those terminologies of headings, and here's a further resource I used. And it talks about issues and challenges that I came across along the way. And this is a good place to put some in the moment things that they found. They need further attention. I wasn't expecting this. There's lack of basic knowledge, for example. And these are my strategies I used. Co-constructed, applied, conferencing, and so on. The resources and the final evidence of work was here. So did they use the 2 samples? Here's some barriers. So they're quite extensive. In some ways, they could have maybe pared back on some of this information, but they certainly are covering things. And this is the focus student. So let's go back to the rubric here. They did have pre and post samples of work. They did show resources. Did they connect the theory? What was the theory saying? What was the evidence? Did I show practice? Did I use evidence of information? Did I evaluate whether they're effective? Well, they did through the contrast and commentary between the before and after samples. Did it show impact? Yes, it did. Did they talk about teaching decisions? Yes, they did, in the moment, and challenges that they addressed. Did they show you this is what my thinking was? Here they talked about Remediation, they were talked about in my first sample, and then I did my further extension work. So it is a different way of demonstrating this criteria, but they've done it quite effectively. Now let's go to the maths example in the secondary context. Connect the theory, etc. So they revisit that. The whole class scenario during the first week. This is what the data showed me. 2 variables they need to demonstrate. Pre-test, they had trouble with this question. So then I used explicit teaching, I taught some general capabilities, and the impact was explicit teaching, because here's some of their scores and their tests, and here's a summary table of that. So I did make an impact. Then they talk about, in here, teaching decisions in the moment and so on. I don't think they did. So this is slightly deficient in this example. Let's look at the sample number 2, scenario number 2, which is the focus student. Based on this, I then made some teaching decisions. So this is pulling from section number 1. And so, was it impact on learning? I used TAPS, I used interests, we used choice boards, I used modulus groups. Here's some student work samples, here's some data that they used. There's a little bit more data here for the focus students. Here is the second part. What were effective? Well, here's some improvements here that we had. The outcomes. My initial data said this is the adjustments, my in the moment decisions. They're starting to fill that box. Assessment data showed, and there's the reference here. So they pulled it back at the end, and I think they've discussed this. So it was a solid but not exceptional one for their secondary. Let's go back to the primary to see where it was with the initial student, your focus student, assumptions, pre-teaching samples, there it was, remediation, how I used the simple paragraph organizing tool, SPR, found out where it was. Here's my next step. Here's my challenges. Here's my strategies, really clear my strategies that I used. Here's some examples of resources I used for that. Here's some student work samples. Here's my final summative assessment piece. So the before and after has them. Here's my barriers. I think they did it slightly more extensively here. So both established what was required. They connected theory, they impacted learning, and examined this and has some teaching material in the way. Often I find that you'll need to have what I call whole class data set before pre-test and whole data sets, summative assessment as you before and after to support the work samples that they have. So yes, they did cover all those areas. And as I say, this one here is no clear way of doing it because you're putting it all together. And you can do that in multiple ways. However, did they demonstrate this thing?